You are truly lucky, because now there is a real man in this family. You useless old man, my son-in-law shouted loudly in front of everyone during dinner. Everyone laughed, and I simply replied, "Great, then you can pay the bill." When the waiter slid the $11,000 bill across the table, he completely lost his composure. Laughter echoed throughout the luxurious restaurant. Crystal chandeliers reflected off the expensive wine glasses. But to me, the room felt colder than ever. I sat there calmly, my hands folded on the table. Across from me was Athelstan, my smug son-in-law, in his shiny suit. He took a sip of wine while looking at me with contempt. My daughter Xenia kept her head down over her plate. She said nothing. Not a single word to defend her own father. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. My name is Egbert, 66 years old. I am glad you are here. Stay with my story until the end, and comment number 1 so we can begin. I once believed I understood family and respect. But I was wrong, especially about Athelstan. In my world of accounting, everything must balance. Debit and credit, income and expenses. But in this house, the scales had completely tipped. Athelstan spent my money as if it were a reward for his existence. He called me a bad debt. He treated my patience like the depreciation of a useless old man. The waiter approached and placed the leather bill holder on the table. I gently pushed it toward Athelstan. A small motion, but as heavy as a declaration of war. Athelstan scoffed and opened the folder. The smile on his lips froze. $11,000. The cost of the extravagant dinner he had ordered to impress his friends. His face changed from red with wine to pale with panic. He looked at me, then back at the bill. He stammered, "Why is it so much?" I took a sip of water. My voice was steady, like I was reading a financial report. "You said you were a real man, Athelstan. A real man would not let a useless old man pay for his pride, right?" Athelstan looked around. His friends began whispering. The arrogance from earlier disappeared, replaced by deep humiliation. He pulled a credit card from his wallet with trembling hands. I knew that card. It was a secondary card linked to my account. But there was one thing Athelstan did not know. This morning I had placed a temporary freeze. The card reader beeped repeatedly. Declined. Athelstan started sweating. He tried again. Declined. Silence fell over the table. I stood up and adjusted the buttons of my jacket. "It seems your credit has reached rock bottom, Athelstan," I said quietly, so only he could hear. I turned and walked away, leaving my son-in-law struggling with the bill and the mocking eyes around him. This was only the beginning. I had spent 40 years auditing major corporations. Now it was time to perform a financial autopsy inside my own family. Every false number would be exposed. Every emotional debt would be paid in full. I stepped out of the restaurant. The night wind was cold, but my heart felt light. Athelstan's game ended here. Mine had just begun. After the night at the restaurant, the air inside the house became thick and heavy. Athelstan no longer shouted. He chose a different way to attack. More subtle. More vicious. He began a plan that I called a hostile takeover. His goal was to turn me into a stranger inside the very house I had spent my life building. It started in the kitchen. The place where Margaret, my late wife, had once poured her whole heart into caring for our family. I was preparing an old-style stew that the grandchildren loved. Athelstan walked in, uninvited. He stood there with his arms crossed, looking at me with fake sympathy. "You are doing it all wrong," he said in a condescending voice. "Look at that flame too high, and your knife work is clumsy. At your age you should be resting. Do not make the kids eat these outdated things anymore." He grabbed the ladle from my hand and poured the entire pot of broth down the sink. The sound of water rushing down the drain felt like the sound of my heart breaking. That was Margaret's recipe. He did not just throw away a meal. He was erasing my memories. I looked at Xenia. My daughter was standing at the doorway, nervously twisting the edge of her shirt. "Xenia, I only wanted to cook for the kids," I said softly, my voice trembling. Xenia glanced at Athelstan and then back at me. "Dad, Athelstan is right. You have been forgetful lately. Yesterday you even forgot to turn off the kettle. We are just worried about you." I froze. I had never forgotten the kettle. It was a lie, a seed of doubt that Athelstan had planted in my daughter's mind. He was running a campaign of erosion. He wanted to turn me into a depreciated asset, an old object ready to be written off. The isolation began to spread to my grandchildren. Emma and Leo, the children who used to cling to their grandfather every evening. Now whenever I tried to read them a story, Athelstan would appear. "Come on, kids, let Grandpa rest. He is tired. Go play the new video game I bought you," he said, leading them away. I stood alone in the dark hallway. Their laughter echoed from the living room, but an invisible wall separated me from them. Athelstan had taken the center position. He controlled every stream of information. He turned me into a ghost inside my own home. The peak came at Christmas dinner, the most important holiday for me. I had prepared the guest list and the menu a month in advance. But on the morning of December 24, Athelstan casually announced it. I canceled all the plans. "This year we are eating at my friend's club. You will be the guest of honor, so you do not need to worry about anything." Guest of honor. In my own house. Athelstan had changed everything without asking me a single question. He was turning the owner into a temporary resident. He was conducting an inventory of the household, and quietly removing me from the list of people with authority. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was old, but my eyes were still sharp. Athelstan thought I was a weak debtor. He forgot that I was an accountant. I know how to observe. I know how to wait. And I know how to recognize a fraud when he begins to grow too confident. The greatest lesson I learned in my career is this: never confuse patience with weakness. When you step back to keep the peace, a predator sees it as an invitation to move closer. Athelstan was moving very close. What he did not know was that he was stepping into an audit zone he would never be able to balance. I began to write everything down. Every expense Athelstan made. Every lie he told. Every act of intrusion. The balance sheet of betrayal was taking shape. And Athelstan Morrison, or Athelstan Mitchell, or whatever name he was using, would soon discover that the price of arrogance can be extraordinarily expensive. Athelstan's presence had now become like a virus. It crept into every corner of my daughter's thoughts. He began a campaign that in the financial world would be called a credit downgrade. But here he was, downgrading my dignity. "Dad, where did you leave the keys this time?" Athelstan asked in a sharp voice as the family prepared to leave. I stood by the door and calmly pointed at the hook. "They are right there, Athelstan." He did not look embarrassed at all. Instead, he turned to Xenia and let out an exaggerated sigh. "See, I just saw him walking around with them and then forgetting again. We really need to reconsider letting him drive. It could be dangerous for the kids." Xenia looked at me. Her eyes no longer held simple affection. There was pity there now mixed with worry. "Dad, maybe Athelstan is right. You seem tired lately. Maybe we should hold on to the car keys just to be safe." My chest tightened. That car was the last thing that made me feel free. Athelstan was trying to take away my legs. He wanted me completely dependent on him. He was turning me into a senile old man through repeated lies, a cheap psychological trick that works surprisingly well on people who want to believe it. Christmas dinner at Athelstan's Friends Club was a carefully staged disaster. He deliberately placed me in a shadowed corner. When he introduced me to his friends, his voice carried a tone of mocking politeness. "This is my father-in-law. He used to be a great accountant, but now he just wants to relax and forget about the world." The room burst into laughter. I sat there like an old piece of furniture, brought out only to decorate Athelstan's glittering image. I watched him pull out his wallet and pay for expensive foreign whiskey, using the credit card I had reactivated after the restaurant incident. He was spending my money to buy respect from strangers. The worst part came when we returned home. Athelstan had cleaned out my office without asking. The files, the notebooks from 40 years of work, all of them had been packed into wooden crates and shoved into the storage room. "You do not need this junk anymore," Athelstan said, when he saw me standing in shock inside the empty office. "I put a brand new massage chair here for you. Just sit, watch television, and stop worrying about numbers. It is too much for your brain now." He was erasing my career, erasing my identity. To Athelstan, I was not a human being. I was a resource to be exploited completely before being discarded. He wanted this house, this wealth, and even my daughter's loyalty. I did not argue. I walked into the storage room and opened one of the crates. I was not looking for the old ledgers. I was looking for the backup phone I had hidden there. I turned it on and began installing financial monitoring software linked to our family accounts. Athelstan believed he had pushed me into a corner. He believed he had disarmed an old man. But he had forgotten one golden rule of accounting. When liabilities grow too large without collateral, the system automatically triggers a risk alert. I looked out the window. Athelstan was standing in the yard with a glass of wine, laughing confidently. He had no idea that I was beginning a full-scale financial autopsy, and the first incision would be the real origin of the name, Athelstan Mitchell. Predators always leave traces when their greed becomes too great, and Athelstan was very greedy. This was no longer about politeness. This was about survival, and I was about to show him how precise and terrifying an accountant can become when he is pushed too far. This humiliation would be returned to him with compound interest. The truth rarely comes from confessions. It comes from the smallest cracks that a fraud leaves behind when he becomes too confident. In Athelstan's case, that crack was his absolute contempt for me. He thought I was a broken object. He never bothered to be careful. That afternoon I was sitting in the living room. My granddaughter Emma was playing a game on her phone. Suddenly a phone started ringing. But it was not mine, and it was not Emma's. It was a strange phone inside Athelstan's coat pocket hanging on the rack. Emma picked it up. "Grandpa, someone named Dave is calling Dad," she said. I took the phone from her. The screen showed an unknown number, and a message popped up immediately after. "Athelstan Morrison, if you do not pay the debt by Friday, we will come to your house. Do not think changing your name can hide your gambling debt. Athelstan Morrison." That name struck me like lightning. My son-in-law's name was Athelstan Mitchell. Why was this man Dave calling him Morrison? And why was a so-called real man being chased for gambling debts? I quickly wrote down the phone number and that strange name. When Athelstan walked into the room, I placed the phone back exactly where it had been. He looked at me with suspicion, then smirked. He grabbed his coat and walked outside, throwing me a smug glance as he left. I went straight to my office and turned on the computer. It was time to use 40 years of accounting skills to follow the trail. A good accountant never looks only at what appears on the balance sheet. We look at the hidden flows of money, the suspicious transactions. I began searching the name Athelstan Morrison in several legal and financial databases I still had access to. What appeared on the screen made my heart pound. There was not just one Athelstan Morrison. There was a criminal record tied to that name. Identity theft, financial fraud, and even worse, he had been married 3 times before. Each time he married, he changed his last name. He was like a parasite. He searched for families with wealth, infiltrated them, drained their resources, then disappeared under a new identity. Xenia was not his first wife. She was simply the next victim on a long list of women he had deceived. The deeper I dug, the colder I felt. Athelstan had secretly used my house as collateral for some of his debts. He had forged my signature on several power of attorney documents. He did not just want to live in this house. He wanted to swallow it whole. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, not from fear but from overwhelming anger. He had insulted Margaret. He had deceived my daughter. He had turned my grandchildren into tools for his schemes. If you believe Athelstan deserves punishment, press the like button so I know you are standing with me. In the accounting world, we call this a fraudulent, hostile takeover. Athelstan believed he controlled the cash flow. He believed he had isolated me. But he made a fatal mistake. He left behind a digital trace. And for an accountant, that trace is nothing less than a death sentence. I opened a new file. Not a tax file. An evidence file. I called it the Financial Autopsy of Athelstan Morrison. I would peel back every layer of his lies. I would make him pay for every dollar he had stolen. That night I watched Athelstan sitting at the dinner table wearing that same arrogant expression. I smiled, a smile he could not understand. "You like numbers, do not you, Athelstan?" I thought quietly. "Then get ready, because the numbers that are coming will present you with a debt you will never be able to repay. Justice is coming, and it will be calculated down to the last decimal." I locked the door to my office. The glow of the computer screen reflected across my face. Tonight I was not a confused old man. I was an auditor carrying out the most important investigation of my life. I called it the Financial Autopsy of Athelstan. The numbers began to move across the screen. I accessed the credit card statements. A horrifying truth appeared. Athelstan was not just spending recklessly. He was withdrawing cash at suburban casinos. $1,000. $2,000. Money disappearing into a bottomless hole. I dug deeper into his former marriages. 3 women. 3 different states. The pattern was frighteningly consistent. He appeared like a savior. He gained their trust. He absorbed their assets. And then he disappeared when creditors began knocking on the door. Athelstan Morrison was not my son-in-law. He was a vulture feeding on financial corpses. But what tightened my chest was not Athelstan's cunning. It was an audio file automatically saved in the family shared drive. My hands trembled as I pressed play. Xenia's voice filled the room. My daughter. Athelstan. I know Dad will be hurt, but we need that money, Xenia said. Her voice sounded guilty but determined. Dad still feels responsible for Mom's death. If we say it is for the children's future, he will not refuse. Then Athelstan spoke, his voice full of satisfaction. Exactly, my love. Your father is just a resource. We need to extract everything we can before it is too late. The old man does not need money anymore. I sat frozen. Every word felt like a blade stabbing into my chest. Xenia had been part of it. My daughter had used the deepest pain of my life as bait. They saw me as a resource. A bank account without feelings. That betrayal hurt more than any financial loss I had ever faced. I opened Athelstan's hidden social media profile. There was a photo of him from that fancy restaurant the other night. He was smiling broadly, holding a glass of expensive wine. The caption beneath the picture made me feel sick. Life is good when a stupid old man pays for everything. That is what financial freedom looks like. A stupid old man. That was how he defined me. He thought he had already won. He thought my silence was the confusion of old age. He did not realize that in accounting, silence often means an audit is about to begin. I began printing documents. The printer hummed quietly through the night. Page after page appeared filled with red numbers. Evidence of identity theft. Records of gambling debts. Documentation of fraudulent loans using my house as collateral. Everything was now clear. Athelstan Morrison had borrowed more than $500,000 under the names of Xenia and me. He had pushed this family to the edge of bankruptcy without Xenia even understanding the scale of the danger. She believed she was taking a little money. She did not realize she was helping a man burn the entire house down. I shut off the computer. Outside the window, the first light of dawn was beginning to appear. Tonight, the autopsy was complete. The corpse of deception now lay on the table. Athelstan believed he had isolated me, but he was the one surrounded. He had chosen the wrong opponent. He had chosen a man who had spent his entire life working with numbers. And numbers have no mercy. They only have absolute precision. Tomorrow, the scales of justice would begin to move. And I would make sure Athelstan Morrison paid every debt he owed, financial and moral, with an interest rate he had never imagined. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity. The pain from Xenia's recording had turned into a cold kind of fuel. In business, when a partner betrays you, you do not cry. You restructure. I walked downstairs and saw Athelstan casually eating breakfast in Margaret's kitchen. Good morning, father-in-law. You look a little tired today. Maybe I should take you to see a psychiatrist, Athelstan said, still chewing his toast. I looked directly into his eyes. There was no patience left in my gaze. Thank you, Athelstan. I feel perfectly fine. In fact, I just completed a very interesting financial reconciliation last night. He froze for a second, then scoffed again. He thought I was rambling. He had no idea that the blade was already at his throat. I left the house and drove straight to the office of my old attorney, George. We had worked together for 30 years. George looked at the stack of documents I placed on his desk, his eyebrows rising. Egbert, this is not a normal civil case. This is criminal. I nodded. I want to cut off his supply, George. I want him suffocating financially before he even realizes what is happening. My campaign began. Step 1. Cut off the private school tuition payments for Emma and Leo, $12,000 every month. Athelstan had been using that account as a cover to withdraw cash. I changed the payment structure to a direct locked trust transfer. Athelstan would never touch a single dollar of the children's tuition again. Step 2. Cancel Xenia's secondary credit card authorization. I knew Athelstan had been using it for gambling and drinking. When he tried to swipe it later that afternoon, the message would appear. Account closed due to a security violation. Step 3, and most important, I began the legal process to release the house from Athelstan's personal loan obligations. He had forged my signature to use the property as collateral. With George's help, I filed an emergency identity fraud notice with the bank. I sat in a cafe across from the bank watching my phone. Notifications began appearing one after another. Athelstan's accounts were being frozen. His gambling debts would soon come crashing down on him once his creditors realized the cash flow had disappeared. A strange calm settled inside me. This was the art of precision. Justice does not need to be loud. It needs to be calculated. Athelstan believed he was playing chess with a confused old man. He did not realize he was playing against a grandmaster of numbers. I returned home in the afternoon. From a distance I saw Athelstan standing in the yard, phone in hand, his face burning red. He was shouting into the receiver. He had just discovered that the money pipeline was sealed shut. I walked past him without even glancing in his direction. "Egbert, what did you do?" Athelstan stepped in front of me, his voice shaking with anger. I stopped and slowly adjusted his collar. "I am simply performing a balance adjustment, Athelstan. In accounting, when expenses exceed revenue, we reduce personnel. And you, Athelstan, are the most wasteful expense I have ever seen." He raised his hand as if to strike me, but the sharp look in my eyes made him hesitate. "Do not test me, Athelstan Morrison. I know every identity you have used. I know every creditor you owe, and I just sent this address to your friend Dave." Athelstan's face turned from red to ghostly pale. All the arrogance vanished instantly. The predator had finally realized he was trapped inside a financial cage with no escape. The game had truly changed. The house that once felt like a home had now become a cold battlefield. Athelstan's shouting echoed from the living room. He had just received a notice from the children's private school. The $12,000 tuition payment had been rejected. He frantically called the bank, but received nothing except automated responses about frozen accounts. I sat quietly in the kitchen, calmly brewing a cup of tea. Heavy footsteps approached. Athelstan stormed in, his eyes burning red, his breath thick with cigarette smoke. "What did you do, old man?" Athelstan roared. "Do you want the kids expelled from school? Do you want your daughter humiliated because she cannot pay the bills?" I placed the teacup on the table. The sound of porcelain touching wood was dry and sharp. "I did nothing, Athelstan. I am simply protecting my property from an identity thief. If you are the real man you claim to be, then $12,000 should not be a problem for you." Athelstan lunged forward, but Xenia appeared. She looked at both of us with an exhausted face. "Dad, what is happening? My card is not working. Everything is blocked." I looked at my daughter. My heart tightened, but my resolve stayed firm. "Xenia, I have established a trust fund for Emma and Leo. Their tuition and future are fully protected, but the trust has one condition. Athelstan will never touch a single dollar of it." Xenia stood frozen. Athelstan turned toward her, his eyes calculating again. He began his usual manipulation, the same old trick he always believed would work. "Xenia, do you see this? Your father has lost his mind. He wants to destroy our family." I did not give him time to continue. I pulled a large envelope from my pocket. "This is the file on Athelstan Morrison," I said calmly. 3 former wives, 5 fraud charges, and a massive gambling debt that is now heading straight toward this house. Athelstan's face drained of color. He tried to snatch the envelope, but I stepped back. "Do not waste your effort, Athelstan. The original documents are already at my attorney's office. The police also have a copy regarding the forged signatures you used to mortgage this house." That night I installed a new security system throughout the house. I no longer trusted the old locks. Cameras were installed. A private security company began monitoring the property around the clock. I called it the Defensive Fortress. Once the supply line is cut, predators become dangerous. I needed to ensure my grandchildren were safe before the real storm arrived. I stood on the balcony, looking toward Margaret's rose garden. Athelstan stood beneath a tree, secretly making phone calls. He was trying to borrow emergency money. He was trying to escape. Wisdom and patience are the greatest weapons of old age. I had spent my entire life balancing complex numbers. Athelstan was only a small error in the final ledger of my life. Justice does not need noise. It needs precision. I knew Athelstan would soon make a desperate mistake. That is the nature of greedy men when they are cornered. He believed he could still manipulate me through Xenia's emotions. What he did not realize was that I had already cut off the entire pipeline of guilt he had been exploiting. Tomorrow the financial autopsy would be complete. Every piece of evidence would come into the light. And Athelstan Morrison would finally learn that the debt he borrowed from my life had no maturity date. It had only one possible ending: absolute punishment. The silence inside the house now carried the scent of an explosion waiting to happen. Athelstan no longer pretended to be the perfect husband. He paced through the living room like a caged animal. Sweat ran down his forehead. He had just received another call from Dave. This time they were not only demanding money, they were threatening his life. I sat across from him calmly. In my hands was the file containing records of his former wives. Athelstan looked at the papers, then back at me. He began to laugh like a madman. "You think you have won, old man? You think a few papers can stop me?" Athelstan stepped closer, his voice hissing through his teeth. "I already have your signature on the house documents. I only need a little more time to legalize it." I looked at him without blinking. "You mean the mortgage document where you scanned and forged my signature?" "I sent my verified signature sample to the bank's forensic examiner this morning. Athelstan, that loan has already been suspended. You have no money. You have no house. And now you do not even have an identity." Athelstan lunged forward and grabbed my collar. His face twisted with rage. Xenia screamed from the staircase. She had just witnessed the true face of the man she once loved. A violent man. A professional fraud. "Let go of my father." Xenia rushed down the stairs and pushed Athelstan away from me. In her hand was a phone playing the recording I had let her hear earlier that afternoon. The recording where Athelstan called both of us nothing more than resources to exploit. Athelstan froze. He looked at Xenia, then at the phone. His expression quickly shifted as he tried to recover. "My love, it is a misunderstanding. I was forced to say those things to protect our family." "Shut up." Xenia slapped him across the face. The truth had finally come out. She had awakened. The pain of betrayal had turned into strength. She was no longer his pawn. Athelstan stepped backward. He knew he had lost everything. The confidence of the predator vanished. He pulled a small folding knife from his pocket. A desperate act from a man with nowhere left to go. "You destroyed everything." I had Athelstan shouted. "If I cannot have this house, then nobody will." I did not move. Instead, I lifted my tablet. The security camera was streaming live footage from outside the gate. A black car had just stopped. Large men were stepping out. "Your friend Dave has arrived, Athelstan. I paid them a small portion of the interest in exchange for your address." Athelstan's face turned ghostly pale. He realized he was trapped between two forces. On one side was justice calculated with precise numbers. On the other side were the ruthless creditors he had been deceiving. His hands began to tremble. The knife slipped from his fingers and fell onto the floor. The intelligence of an accountant is not only about balancing books, it is about knowing when to deliver the decisive move. Athelstan believed he controlled the cash flow. He did not realize I had turned that very flow of money into a noose around his neck. Justice does not need noise. It requires precision. Athelstan Morrison, or whatever name you use, your debt has reached maturity. And the price you must pay will not only be money. It will be your freedom, and the honor you never truly possessed. A violent pounding echoed on the front door. The collapse of a fake empire had officially begun. Athelstan stared toward the door in absolute terror. His game had ended in complete humiliation. The pounding on the door sounded as if it would shatter the last piece of silence in the house. Athelstan stood frozen in the middle of the living room. He looked toward the gate where the dark silhouettes of his creditors surrounded the entrance. Then he looked toward the back door, where the blue and red lights of police cars were beginning to flash. I had calculated the timing down to the second. "George," my lawyer walked in with 2 police officers. "Athelstan Morrison," one of the officers said. "You are under arrest for identity theft, falsifying financial documents, and fraudulently obtaining property." Athelstan stammered. "You are mistaken. I am Athelstan Mitchell. This is my house. My father-in-law is senile. He is slandering me." I stepped forward. I placed the original file on the table. A copy of an arrest warrant from another state was inside it as well. "Athelstan Morrison, Your real name was erased from the system 10 years ago after a fraud case in a northern state. You are not Mitchell. You are a financial ghost. And today that ghost has to appear. Xenia stood behind me. She was no longer crying. Her eyes were cold as ice. You used my children's names to open debt accounts, Athelstan. You were going to destroy their future. Get out of our lives. Athelstan realized there was no way back. He suddenly rushed toward the window, trying to escape. But the officers were faster. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the room. To me, that sound was sweeter than any music. It was the sound of closing the ledger on a bad debt that had lasted far too long. As he was taken to the police car, Athelstan turned back and shouted curses at me. You miserable old man. You will die alone in this house. I looked at him and smiled calmly. I may be old, Athelstan, but I am never alone with the truth. As for you, you will have plenty of time to calculate where you went wrong during the next several years in federal prison. The police car drove away. The creditors outside were dispersed. The chaos ended. The house returned to its quiet state. But this was not the silence of suffering. It was the silence after a successful surgery. I sat down in my old armchair. Xenia knelt beside me and held my trembling hands. Dad, I am sorry. I was blind. I almost lost you. I gently touched my daughter's head. In accounting, there is always room for adjustment entries, Xenia. We lost a lot of money, but we regained our dignity. That is the greatest profit a family can ever achieve. Outside in the yard, Margaret's roses were moving softly in the night wind. Athelstan believed he could pull them out by the roots. He never understood that their roots ran deep in this soil, just like my love for this family could never be shaken by cheap deception. Athelstan's debt had been paid with his own freedom. Justice had been delivered with absolute precision. I closed my eyes and felt a deep sense of relief spreading through me. The financial autopsy was finished, and from the ashes of betrayal we would begin building everything again. Clean and honest. 3 months after Athelstan was taken away, my house was no longer a battlefield. It had become what it was always meant to be again, a home. Athelstan Morrison received a 5-year prison sentence for identity theft and interstate fraud. He now has plenty of time to perform calculations inside a narrow prison cell. I stood in the garden as the morning sunlight stretched across the flower beds. Xenia stepped outside holding 2 cups of hot coffee. She looked different. The sharpness had returned to her eyes, no longer clouded by the exhaustion and worry of someone who had been manipulated. Dad, look, the roses Mom planted are starting to bloom again, Xenia said softly. I smiled. We lost a large amount of money cleaning up the damage Athelstan left behind. But in the ledger of life it was a reasonable expense. What we bought back was peace. Emma and Leo ran through the garden laughing. They were no longer kept away from their grandfather. Together we replanted the rose bushes Athelstan once tried to destroy. Every new plant placed into the soil was a promise of stronger bonds. Real families survive lies. The only thing that cannot survive is the fake version predators try to create. I realized that for a long time I had allowed patience to turn me into a target. I had forgotten that protecting your personal boundaries is also part of love. Never let anyone convince you that your kindness is outdated. George helped me finalize the trust fund for the children. Now no one can ever touch their future. My assets are no longer a resource for others to exploit. They are a legacy for the people I love most. I looked into the camera, as if I were looking directly into the eyes of everyone hearing this story. Life is not always balanced like an accounting sheet. Sometimes you face unexpected losses. Sometimes you are betrayed by the very people you trusted most. If you have followed the story all the way to this point, then it means it held your attention. Please do us a quick favor. Like and subscribe. Many people watch but never do that, and it costs nothing. You will receive more powerful stories every day. But remember this. Wisdom and patience are your greatest weapons. Never be afraid to face the truth, no matter how painful it may be. Precision will guide you back. Thank you for walking with me on this journey to reclaim justice. I hope my story gives you the strength to protect the most sacred values of your family. My name is Egbert, a retired accountant who never stopped guarding the real values of life. Goodbye for now, and I will see you again in the next stories about truth and dignity. May you always keep your own balance sheet of happiness in order. Golden sunlight covered the house. The scent of roses drifted gently through the air. Every debt had been paid. Every error had been corrected. At last I was truly home.